Welcome to this special episode, where we will move beyond just discussing laws and regulations. Instead, we're delving right into the heart of professional underwater training, touching upon the true essence of an ancient craft that remains remarkably modern.
Indeed, Noah. This episode begins a journey that started on the 2nd of March, set to transform 19 individuals completely. It will shift their work and life perspectives entirely. It's a profound journey, in every sense of the word.
And that journey kicked off with CEDIFOP's new OTS inshore course. For our listeners, the acronym stands for Commercial Diving and Hyperbaric Operations Training Center. What immediately strikes me and speaks volumes about the course's appeal is the sheer diversity of the students. Only 3 of them are actually Sicilian.
Only 3, yes. That is a surprising statistic, and it really highlights a scope far beyond the regional level. The others come from every corner of Italy, from Gallareti to Taranto, Milan to Viterbo, and many other cities and regions in between. But the biggest surprise is that we even have students coming from China and Algeria.
From China and Algeria, that is a very strong signal. It suggests PALERMO and CEDIFOP are becoming a national and even international benchmark for regulated training in this highly specialized sector. These students are facing an intensive 660 hours of training, which is a considerable commitment.
It is a significant investment of time and energy, without a doubt. But it's crucial to stress that this is not a generic course with perhaps obsolete or non-standardized programs. Everything here revolves around 2 fundamental pillars that guarantee the qualification's validity and recognition.
And those pillars are the new Sicilian Assessorial Decree and the international IDSA standards from the International Diving Schools Association, correct? I imagine this double compliance is what makes the course so attractive and the qualifications so globally marketable.
Absolutely, and we must be very precise here, because in the underwater world, clear qualifications mean safety, both for the operators and for the companies employing them. The inshore level they are achieving, which is the starting point of their professional career, is a meticulous combination of 2 specific modules well defined by IDSA standards.
Can you explain the composition of this inshore level a bit better? What are the 2 IDSA modules that form it, and what exactly do they qualify one to do in terms of techniques and depth? It's important to understand the operational foundation these future professionals will have.
Of course, it includes IDSA Level 1, which covers open-circuit scuba diving, known technically as SCUBA, or self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. This is the first fundamental step. Then we have IDSA Level 2, which focuses on surface-supplied diving. Combined, these 2 modules qualify a professional to operate in a depth range from 0 to 30 meters.
So inshore is the operational base, covering diving within 30 meters, both with scuba and surface supply. It sounds like a robust starting point, but you hinted that the professional climb certainly does not stop there. Beyond 30 meters, you enter a completely different world, that of offshore, with increasing challenges and technologies.
Exactly. The inshore field mainly deals with port works, interventions on coastal civil works, inspections of barges and small boats, and sometimes supports aquaculture projects. But when we talk about offshore, much more complex and deep scenarios open up, primarily linked to the energy industry, oil and gas, and offshore wind.
And what are the levels of specialization within this offshore world? I imagine progression is dictated by greater depths and the use of increasingly sophisticated equipment, requiring even more specific training.
Precisely. The first of these is offshore air, often called top-up, which allows operating up to 50 meters deep. This level corresponds to IDSA Level 3. Here, divers begin to use more complex diving systems than in inshore, such as underwater baskets and open bells, which offer greater protection and logistical support for the operator.
Baskets and open bells, these sound like systems that provide a more controlled environment for diving, a sort of mobile platform for the diver operating at those depths. And after level 3, There is the pinnacle, level 4.
Yes, then there is the absolute pinnacle of the profession, offshore deep sea IDSA level 4. Here we enter the realm of extreme diving. It is no longer just about depth, but about prolonged bottom times and the need for breathing gas mixtures other than air to manage the physiological effects of pressure.
Deep sea, I imagine, is the most extreme challenge for an elite few. We are talking about dives well beyond 50 meters with special gas mixtures like heliox, a blend of helium and oxygen to counter nitrogen narcosis and reduce gas density. And naturally, the use of closed bell systems in saturation, an environment where every second of bottom time is incredibly precious.
Precisely, Noah. The closed bell is a real underwater habitat that allows divers to live and work under pressure for days or weeks. This approach, called saturation diving, eliminates the need for multiple decompressions between dives, drastically optimizing work times and reducing the risks associated with repeated ascents and descents. It is the frontier of human underwater engineering.
Incredibly sophisticated system that requires not only exceptional technical skills, but also uncommon physical and mental endurance. Returning to our inshore students, and speaking of bottom time, there is a very specific and non-negotiable requirement in Italy for professional qualification, isn't there? An aspect often underestimated by those looking at the sector from the outside.
Yes, absolutely fundamental. DPRS 31 of 2018. The decree of the President of the Sicilian region, on page 7, is categorical on this aspect. It establishes an essential condition to obtain the professional qualification and be registered in the telematic directory of underwater operators. Every student must scrupulously accumulate and record in their logbook the minimum bottom times established by IDSA regulations.
So it is not enough to pass the theoretical and practical exams in a pool or in confined waters. There must be real, documented and verifiable minutes spent underwater in operational scenarios that replicate actual working conditions. Without those minutes, even with a certificate of completion, one is not fully qualified.
It is exactly like that. Without those real, demonstrable and certified minutes, registration in the telematic directory is not possible. And without registration, the title has no legal validity to operate professionally. This requirement guarantees that the operator possesses not only theoretical knowledge, but also the necessary practical experience, and has truly developed the sensitivity and reaction capacity needed when under pressure, in every sense.
I understand the importance of this clause. I imagine, however, that for a novice, accumulating these hours can represent a challenge. Many courses in other contexts perhaps aim more at obtaining the piece of paper rather than real practical experience. Here we are going against the time.
It is a crucial distinction, Noah, and a point on which CEDIFOP and Sicilian regulations are very strict. It is not a simple certificate of attendance. It is a certification of competence, and competence in this craft is measured largely by time spent in the water, facing real situations, managing equipment, and solving problems. It is a philosophy that prioritizes safety and operational effectiveness.
It seems like a guarantee for the employer, certainly, but also for the safety of the diver himself and his teammates. However, do you not think that this rigidity on bottom times could, in some way, create an excessive barrier to entry for some, making the path longer and more expensive compared to perhaps a more hasty training offered elsewhere?
Well, Noah, I understand your point of view and the concern about barriers to entry. However, in the professional diving sector, we simply cannot afford compromises on safety and experience. The cost of an error underwater is too high. These requirements are not there to hinder, but to select and train professionals who can operate with maximum safety and reliability. It is not a barrier, but a standard of excellence.
And I grasp the argument on safety. Yet it is a craft that requires a large initial investment, both in time and money. Couldn't it be that, while guaranteeing excellence, we end up limiting access to perhaps less wealthy talents, favoring those who already have resources? It is a matter of fair access to the profession, as well as safety.
It is a legitimate and complex discussion, Noah. However, it is important to stress that the profession of OTS, or underwater technical operator, is among the most remunerative in the maritime sector, precisely because of the risks and skills required. The initial investment often pays off in a relatively short time, provided you have the right dedication. The regulation ensures that only the best prepared enter a market where trust is everything.
An interesting perspective, framing the investment as a necessary filter for an elite profession. But there is a truly unique and fascinating moment in this course that unites centuries-old tradition with an almost artisanal sensitivity, a bridge between the glorious past and innovation. I am referring to the very first surface-supplied dive.
Yes, it is an almost magical moment, Noah, and represents an irreplaceable educational experience for what is in fact their first practical experience of surface-supplied diving from the panel. The students do not immediately use a modern helmet made of resin or composite materials. That's where the PALERMO comes into play, a name that evokes history and deep roots.
The PALERMO, an evocative name that immediately recalls the ancient figure of the diver. I imagine it is not a simple helmet, but a piece with a story, perhaps a faithful replica or a carefully restored vintage object. What makes it so special in this training context?
The story behind the PALERMO is even more fascinating than one might think. It is not a restored vintage helmet, but a modern creation that honors tradition. Mauricio Masucci, the builder of the helmet, spoke to us with great passion about his vision. I will quote his words verbatim, which I believe perfectly convey the idea. Quote, "I wanted a real helmet, copper, brass, and bronze. The weight, the smell of the tinned metal, the challenge of making the pieces fit in the garage, of welding them with obsessive care, and then seeing those full-size viewports ready for the sea, like eyes opening on a new world. For me, it is the evolution of the species, the PALERMO." End quote.
A statement that encapsulates all the passion and artisanal mastery. So, Masucci created a helmet that, while recalling the imposing and robust aesthetics of the early 20th century, has an advanced technological soul, making it completely functional and safe for today's teaching. With tempered glass, O-rings for a perfect seal, and a hand wheel for air regulation, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. The appearance is that of a classic early 20th century helmet, but its construction is anything but ancient. It was built in 2008, surprisingly. It is not a restored vintage piece, but an object designed for modern functionality and safety. This makes it even more significant because it demonstrates how respect for tradition can coexist with the contemporary needs of a cutting-edge training centre.
From 2008 until today, CEDIFOP has used it for a very precise educational reason: to teach students respiratory sensitivity. Can you elaborate on why a traditional helmet is so effective for this purpose, perhaps more so than a modern resin helmet in an age of high technology?
Of course, the traditional metal helmet with its internal volume and the configuration of the breathing system offers a slightly different resistance to airflow compared to modern helmets. This forces the student to develop a greater awareness of their own breathing act, to feel the air entering and exiting, to manage their breath in a more controlled but also more physical environment. It's a lesson in underwater proprioception.
So, it is a fundamental exercise to build the foundations of what will be a more complex management of gases and depths. It is not just a historical object, but an irreplaceable pedagogical tool that offers direct experience with the roots of the profession, instilling humility and respect for the pioneers.
That is exactly it. It offers a tactile and almost emotional understanding of what it meant to dive in the past and how technology has progressed to make the profession safer and more efficient. It teaches that behind every innovation there is a story of evolution and engineering solutions to concrete problems, uniting history with current practice.
It is fascinating to think that these students go from wearing a copper and bronze helmet, almost a relic, to learn breath management, to the ISO 156181 underwater welding certification, which is at the forefront of technology and industrial skills. This creates a perfect bridge between the historical tradition of the diver and the most advanced technological needs of the future.
It is precisely the demonstration of how the profession has evolved in a surprising way, while always maintaining a strong link with its origins and fundamental skills. The ability to manage one's body and breathing underwater, taught with the PALERMO, is the same basis that allows performing a complex weld at considerable depths.
And the ISO 15618-1 certification for underwater welding is an extremely sought-after and remunerative skill, isn't it? I imagine this skill opens doors to large-scale marine infrastructure projects, from platform construction to underwater pipeline installation, requiring precision and endurance in hostile environments.
Absolutely. Underwater welding is a highly specialized niche within the world of OTS, and the ISO 15681 certification is an international standard that attests to a very high-level competence. It is a qualification that opens doors to work on offshore energy infrastructure, ship and port maintenance, and even salvage operations. It is where manual skill meets material science in an extreme environment.
So, the training path at CEDIFOP is not just about diving, but integrates multidisciplinary skills that make the underwater technical operator a real engineer of the seabed. But it is not just the technical aspect that evolves, but also the mindset of the professional who must face global challenges.
It is 360-degree training that prepares the individual not only to dive and work, but also to understand the environment in which they operate and to manage complex situations. At the end of these 660 hours of intensive training between theory, practicing confined water and real dives, these professionals will have a real passport to the world in their hands.
A passport, yes. A document that attests to their skills and, thanks to a specific European mechanism, will make their title recognised throughout the European Union. We are talking about the Europass Certificate Supplement, correct? It is a guarantee of unprecedented professional mobility.
Precisely. The Europass Certificate Supplement is a crucial component that translates the title obtained into a standardised and understandable format in all EU countries. They will no longer be, as they say with a bit of an old-fashioned expression, prisoners of the port or of local regulations, but true global professionals with the freedom to seek job opportunities anywhere in Europe.
And it is a huge advantage in a sector where projects are often international and require teams with certifications at a transnational level. But Eloise, I want to push a bit on this point. Is the Europass really so universally accepted without friction? Are there not still bureaucracies or local resistances that can make this mobility less easy despite the European directive?
That is an excellent question, Noah, and it goes to the heart of the issue of professional mobility. Although the Europass Certificate Supplement is an extraordinarily effective tool and a huge step towards standardisation, it is true that full acceptance can vary slightly. In theory, it eliminates areas. In practice, small interpretive nuances or additional local requirements can emerge, but they are exceptions rather than the rule.
So, it is not an absolute blank check, but still a very powerful facilitator. Let us say the directive is there, the formal recognition too, but reality on the ground can present some small roughnesses. This does not change the fact that having an understandable and certified title at the European level is an invaluable advantage compared to a purely national title.
Exactly. It is a huge facilitator. It gives the professional negotiating leverage and immediate credibility that a simple national certificate, perhaps unknown abroad, could never offer. Most large international companies operate in a European context and enormously appreciate the clarity and standardization that Europass guarantees. It overcomes the initial linguistic and regulatory obstacle.
So Europass does not eliminate every possible hitch, but creates a solid framework that companies recognize and value. This projects these OTS towards a future where career opportunities are no longer confined, but extend across seas and continents.
Absolutely, yes. From the depths of China to Gallerate, large underwater works, maintenance of energy infrastructure, or search and recovery today speak only one language, that of certified and internationally recognized competence. And CEDIFOP, with its rigorous approach, contributes to training these ambassadors of Italian competence in the world.
It is a beautiful image, that of ambassadors of Italian competence. I would like to briefly explore an aspect we touched on only in passing, related to safety and regulation. We spoke about DPRS 31 of 2018. What exactly is its role, and why is it so important that it is a regional decree, not a state one?
DPRS 31 of 2018 is the decree of the President of the Sicilian region. Its importance is twofold. First, it is the regulation that in Sicily specifically governs the training and practice of the profession of underwater technical operator, integrating and making IDSA international standards operational in the regional regulatory context. This guarantees a clear legal framework for training and activity.
And the fact that it is a regional decree rather than a state one has any particular implications? Does it not create regulatory fragmentation? Considering we are talking about a profession that, as we have seen, is increasingly global and mobile, I have doubts about the consistency of the system.
That is a valid criticism, Noah. Having regional regulations can, in theory, lead to fragmentation. However, in the case of Sicily, the region has specific and almost exclusive competence in professional training by virtue of its special statute. So, rather than creating disorder, this DPRS filled a regulatory void that would otherwise have left the sector without clear regulation in the Sicilian territory.
So, in this specific case, the regional decree is a pragmatic solution for a regulatory void, rather than a factor of fragmentation. It gives a certain reference to schools like CEDIFOP and to future OTS. But does it also mean that outside of Sicily, there could be slight differences in interpretations or requirements? Or does Europass flatten these differences at a continental level?
Europass flattens differences at a continental level regarding the recognition of the title and associated skills, but the regional regulation governs the delivery of training and internal requirements for obtaining that title in that specific region. So, while an OTS trained in Sicily will have a title recognised in the EU, thanks to Europass, the training requirements might have been slightly different from those of a course held, say, in another Italian region, if it had its own specific regulation.
It is a subtle but important distinction. Training follows regional rules, but the final certificate has broad validity. This leads us to reflect on the future of this profession. What are the next challenges for an OTS once the inshore qualification is obtained?
The challenges are multiple and stimulating. Once the inshore qualification is obtained, the first step is to start working, accumulating practical experience in the allowed depth range. Many find employment in port works, maintenance of underwater pipelines, and ship inspections. This experience is crucial for solidifying the learned skills.
And after consolidating the inshore experience, I imagine the natural progression is towards the offshore levels we described to access more complex and remunerative jobs that require further specialization.
Precisely. Offshore air, IDSA Level 3, is the next step for many, allowing operation up to 50 metres. Then, for the most ambitious, there is Level 4, the deep sea, which opens the doors to the world of saturation diving and gas mixtures, representing the pinnacle of the career and requiring years of experience and exceptional psychophysical preparation.
This requires constant commitment to training and updating. It is not a profession where one can settle for the first title. Learning is a continuous process, especially with the evolution of technologies and safety regulations.
Absolutely. The professional underwater world is constantly evolving. New technologies for exploration, for construction works, for robotic inspection. All this requires the professional to be always updated, not only on their own diving techniques, but also on equipment and safety protocols. It is a sector that does not forgive stagnation.
This is a crucial aspect. Trading at CEDIF, therefore, does not just provide a starting point, but lays the foundations for a mindset of continuous learning and adaptation. A bit like the PALERMO, which, despite being a reenactment, teaches a sensitivity that is still current.
It is a perfect analogy. The Palumbarist teaches basic awareness, the roots of breathing underwater. ISO 15618 welds teach precision and the application of advanced technologies. Europass teaches mobility and open-mindedness. Everything is interconnected to form a complete and resilient profession.
So the key message is that the OTS profession is a life path, not just an isolated qualification. It requires curiosity, dedication, and a robust work ethic. But speaking of ethics, what are the biggest ethical or professional risks that an OTS might encounter, and how does the training at CEDIFOP seek to mitigate them?
Excellent question, Noah. Ethical and professional risks are intrinsic to any high-risk profession. First, there is the temptation to cut corners on safety protocols to save time or money, an extremely dangerous and dishonest practice. Training at CEDIFOP inculcates an uncompromising safety culture where every procedure is sacred.
So discipline and respect for procedures are the first line of defense against ethical lapses, but there are also external pressures, perhaps from employers trying to push boundaries or proposing jobs for which the OTS is not fully qualified or equipped. How do you learn to say no in such a competitive sector?
It is a fundamental point. Training also includes modules on underwater labour legislation and professional responsibility. Students learn to recognise their limits, the limits of their qualifications, and the equipment. They learn that saying no to an unsafe job or one outside their competence is not a sign of weakness, but of professionalism and integrity. The life of a colleague, or one's own, can depend on that decision.
This is crucial. Knowing how to refuse a dangerous or non-compliant assignment, even if economically attractive, is the mark of a true professional. It is a form of silent leadership that develops with awareness and training.
Exactly. And then there is the risk of operating in situations where the marine environment itself is compromised, perhaps with toxic waste or pollution. Training also includes environmental awareness, teaching operators to minimize their impact and report problematic situations. They are not just workers, but guardians of the sea.
Guardians of the sea. I like that definition. It recognizes their dual responsibility to their work and to the environment in which they operate. This adds a non-negligible ethical dimension to an already very demanding job.
Yes, it is an aspect that is gaining more and more importance. Modern OTS are not just operational arms, but eyes and hands that interact directly with the marine ecosystem. Their environmental awareness is a precious resource for monitoring and, where possible, protecting the underwater environments in which they work.
It is a complete and integrated vision of the profession, which goes far beyond the simple ability to dive and perform an operation. It is training that shapes responsible, aware and globally prepared individuals. It is clear that CEDIFOP is setting a benchmark of excellence.
I really think so, Noah. The entire philosophy of CEDIFOP, from the rigour in selecting students to the intensity of the programme, from the choice of unique educational tools like the PALERMO, to the adherence to the highest international standards, is oriented to producing professionals who are not only capable, but also extremely reliable and respected in every part of the world.
And the participation of students from distant countries like China and Algeria, as well as from every corner of Italy, eloquently testifies to the success of this philosophy and the validity of the path offered. It is a centre of attraction for those seeking the best in this field.
Absolutely. Those 19 pioneers who started the course in March are not just learning to do a job, they are laying the foundations for an international career based on recognized skills and a deep understanding of their role, both technical and ethical. They are becoming part of a global community of highly qualified professionals.
They are becoming, in fact, the pillars of the next generations of underwater technical operators. With their training at CEDIFOP, they represent the future of a vital and continuously expanding sector.
And this is a message of hope and opportunity for many young people, and even not so young, who seek a concrete, challenging professional path with a real impact, both on infrastructure and the environment. A future that is built precisely from the bottom of the sea.
If this conversation on excellence training in the underwater world inspired you, share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or anyone who might benefit and draw inspiration from it.